Sasquatch, Ghost, Dogman, aliens, demons, shadow people, skinwalkers, even the Fae. Our universe is vast, dark, and wrought with infinite unexplained phenomena. We have tasked ourselves with assisting humanity in finding the keys to unlock the mysteries that abound in and around our world. What we intend to reveal behind the curtain of darkness may very well invoke those fears long tucked away in our memories. We will meet that fear head on as we strive to shine the light of understanding on these phenomena. The goal is to arm you with the power of knowledge to confront and even combat these entities. We welcome you to join us on our quest. We are Midwest Night Watchers.
Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
We got a great show tonight on Piercing the Veil. We got Ronald Murphy, the Cryptid guru. We're going to get into all kinds of stories and experiences, of whether it's paranormal, cryptid, you name it. We're going to talk about it tonight and just have a good old time and have fun and see where this story ends up going. So glad you guys could all join us, and we'll just go ahead and bring Ronald up here, and we'll get going into the stories. Welcome,
there, folks. How you doing?
Hi, Ron.
I got to tell you, of all the podcasts I do, Piercing the Veil's intro is my favorite. I'm not sure who came up with it, but it's awesome.
You don't recognize the voice?
I do recognize the voice, but whoever wrote that was genius.
He did it. Yeah, texted
Nice.
all of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I sent him a request, and he said he'd do it, and then I basically jotted down just what our show's kind of about, this generality, and he came up with it and put it all together for us.
And you know what? I'm glad you said generality, because that's exactly the way I operate as well too. And whenever I was listening to everything that you were saying, a part of that intro, I thought, that's exactly the things that I espouse as well. We don't know what we're dealing with, right? You talked about the Fae. That's one of the things that I like to introduce. I like to investigate as well, because there's such folklore about this going back thousands of years. And we kind of now in modern day society, we think that stuff is silly and we throw it out and we don't believe that anymore. But, I'm coming to the conclusion of what we are experiencing in a lot of cases is indeed some sort of elemental activity. And I think that all the things that were reported back in the ancient world is still with us today, because none of this stuff exists in a vacuum. And we really have to look to the past in order to make some sense of what's going on in the present and what might happen in the future.
Right.
The problem with just say the Fae. I mean, the problem is that you got the fairy book stories, and Walt Disney, give you that little fairy tale story of it. And nobody really knows or digs into the history of the Fae, or what they're all about, or where they come from, or how many countries actually have Fae stories.
That's right. Yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. It was his suggestion that the Victorians destroyed the fairy forever. And I think that does make a lot of sense. In the Victorian imagination, fairies went from these mischievous type of, earthbound spirits to, playthings, right? They became very innocuous, and they became Tinkerbell. They became little figures with diaphanous wings of the body of Marilyn Monroe. Their wildness was gone. What we have done, and what we as humanity like to do, is we like to domesticate that which is wild, and we take away from those things that spirit of what they are, where they came from. Right now, Dogman is still wild. Bigfoot is not wild, but we're doing our darndest to domesticate these things. But as a researcher, and as somebody that is also completely enamored by the world of the paranormal, I'm glad that these things are still out there, because it makes us much more human. It makes us more aware that we don't know everything that's out there. So these things that go bump in the night, these things that lurk around in the shadows, we don't know about them as much as they presumably know about us. And that really, really matters to us because we as humans need to be put in our place every now and then.
Yeah, you kind of lose your zest if you know everything about a subject. I mean,
Right.
we don't want to lose the unknown, the excitement about finding something new or a new discovery or a new story or tale or experience. I hope we never come to the end of it. That's like me and Jane talk about. I hope they never catch a Bigfoot or a dog man.
Right.
Let's just keep it out there going so we have something to talk about and experience and try to make a theory out of it or
Yeah, no, I agree. I think once, one of these things is put down on a cold slab and their insides are taken out and we've, labeled their body parts and everything, then we have lost that mystique and
Yeah.
we've lost that part of us that was still wild and untamed. But it's also like a layer of an onion. I think that every time we get one question solved, we peel off that layer and guess what? There's something else there as well too. We are designed to be curious creatures, and I think that's a good thing. And there's a lot in this world to be curious about. And the more we pierce the veil, the more we see into this other world that may exist right alongside our world, at the same time. And those are the places that I like to look and wonder about and see what I can investigate and uncover there.
Yeah, we feel it's all connected.
Mhm.
Whether it's paranormal, UFO, big man,
Big man.
Bigfoot. I was thinking of something else, but Bigfoot. It's all connected.
Man.
Whether it's a dimensional being, whether it's a spiritual or a paranormal thing. They're all similarities, but yet they're all distinct from each other.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So if you were in Nepal, their hairy wild man over there, the abominable snowman, is going to act, differently than our Bigfoot and so on. But what's curious is we start connecting the dots. We have the Yeren in China, right? We have the Almasty in Russia, the Mapinguari in South America, the Yowie. We have the Woodwoos in England, right? In the British Isles, the Grey Man in Scotland. The more you look around, you see how all these things are really interconnected. It's just not with us, right? It's just the first Bigfoot story out there. What looks like Bigfoot is, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is contemporaneous with the pyramids. So we're going back, 7,000 years. And of course, that's part of an oral tradition. So it goes back much farther than that. And we see the visage, the likeness of a hairy wild man that is interacting with society. And I think that we see hints throughout history. And I'm also a firm believer that we have forgotten far more than we have remembered in our collective histories as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what was written or talked about back then? It might have been a commonplace thing to see them or have them. There's already Native American tales where Sasquatch or Bigfoot worked with them. Originally they battled against them, but then somehow they figured out how to work together against the Indians' enemies.
Right, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. That's right. What happens whenever we deal with places like Mesopotamia is we start getting this. The waters are pretty muddied because you start having religion in there. So by the time we get to the Old Testament, by the time we get to the Jewish Bible, we do see hints of these things in here, right? We still see hints of the Nephilim, as people would call it. And we hear the mentions of giants in there. And we see anecdotal stories like Goliath, right? Mm-hmm. So we know that there is something going on in the ancient world that just doesn't make sense to our contemporaneous viewpoints, right? So whatever is going on there, I think a lot of it is indeed history, but because it is intrinsically tied to religion, it's very hard to sift through all the dogma to get to the actual core of these stories. Now, I'm a very religious person as well, too. I'm a cradle Catholic. I go to church and all that stuff. But we have to really get to what inspired these stories. Is Goliath a cultural remembrance of giants? Are there cultural remembrances of something like remnant hominids like Neanderthals that gave rise to the idea of the Nephilim? What exactly is the core of these stories that provides us with our mythology and our religion today?
Yeah, I think all that stuff has been buried and lost, just like you said.
Yeah.
It's just like everything in the Bible or the scriptures or even old text. You got to think of them at their mindset back at the time, what they're trying to describe. They don't have the words that we have, and we don't use the words that they used to use. So who knows what they're describing? You have to try to dig into it and make the best theory or logical step you can make.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and there are archaeologists out there that are looking at the linguistic parts of things like the Nephilim to see where it comes from. So a lot of times whenever we talk about the Nephilim, a lot of ancient astronauts theorists like to grab onto this because the name, means the fallen one. So it appears as if they fell from some sort of height where you get like fallen angels from. Now, there is, as of late, archaeological suggestions that it doesn't mean fall as in going from a height and falling down, but it means lower than. Now, this is very interesting. If it does indeed mean lower than, then what the writer is trying to tell us is that these creatures, these Nephilim that people are encountering, are actually not human, subhuman. You see, lower than a human. And one of the ways that this might be done is that these creatures, these entities, these beings do not participate in the cult of the Jews, right? That's one way. It might be that kind of a thing that's going on too. Or the other way means it could be remnant population of early humanoids or early hominids that simply didn't have culture like us, so they were lower than us. And I think we really do need to have a dialogue about this kind of stuff. And I'm glad that there are shows like this out there that provide a forum, because we really, really have to talk about this stuff. And I think that these are discussions that really need to be made even on a university level. We always shy away from these things because it seems rather fringe. But really, it's not fringe. This is a part of our culture. This shapes the way we view things and the way we think about things. But I think that there's a lot of academic research out there that whenever it starts kind of going over to the way of the paranormal or the supernatural, people kind of pull back and say, this is going to ruin my credibility, when in fact, we are getting farther and farther away from the truth.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it because, like you said, they have Christian beliefs, and you don't talk about this kind of stuff in church or even with your Christian friends. So it does need to be talked about. If you don't want to believe it, that's fine, but at least have an open mind that it could be.
That's right. So I like to study vampires a lot as well, too. I'm fascinated by the idea of the vampire. And one of the first vampiric characters we find in literature is Lilith, right? And we find her not in the Jewish text of the Old Testament, but we find her in Jewish rabbinical traditions, right? So these would be commentaries upon actual sources. And one of the themes of Lilith was that she was made consubstantial with Adam. So she wasn't taken from Adam's rib; she was taken from the very earth in which Adam was taken from. So, as a patriarchal society, that starts getting a little bit scary, because now you have a woman equal with man. So how do you deal with that kind of thing? And then she did not want to be subservient to Adam, and therefore, in a patriarchal culture, she was tossed out of Eden. And as the story goes, the tradition goes, and the commentary by Jewish scholars is that as she was wondering about the wasteland that surrounded Eden, she ran into a fallen angel, which may have been Satan himself, right? And they coupled, and in that coupling, they produced something called the Lilin, and it was the hereditary badge of honor for the Lilin now to go out and feed upon the children of man, right, off of Adam and Eve's children. So that's an interesting thing. And we do see glimpses of Lilith in Deuteronomy. We see her depicted as a screech owl that lives out in the desert regions. So we do see glimpses of this, but there's so much about our religion, our history that has shaped us that we don't, like you had said, Jane, that we don't talk about because it doesn't mesh well with the Sunday services that we're getting nowadays, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We have all these traditions out there that are almost completely forgotten because they simply don't make any sense to what's going on in the canonized doctrine.
Yeah, because I mean, like us, we grew up in the church, and studied the Bible pretty good. But we also started getting into reading Apocrypha, like what you mentioned, Lilith, and all those stories that are in there, are pretty detailed. And when you read the Bible, you see supernatural stuff happening in the Bible. Even if you take away Lilith and all that stuff, you still see, Jesus walking on water, going through walls, raising people from the dead. So it's all connected. It's all supernatural. So how can you not take, the stories like of the Witch of Endor out of the Bible? And
Right.
Absolutely. And well, I think one of the reasons why you take the Witch of Endor out of the Bible is because, again, it can be used to put women down. I truly think a lot of this stuff was because Lilith is a very powerful figure. I mean, she is definitely an antagonist, but she's also, as I said, a very powerful, strong female figure. Men don't like that, and to think also, because almost from the very beginning, vampires were almost always depicted as female. Think about a man who's supposed to be the king of the castle, but something's creeping into the castle at night and feeding on the person, right? Now man has become vulnerable. He's no longer able to, resist the temptations that are coming in from the outside. And the same way with mermaids. I wrote a book about mermaids as well, too. And for years, up until the Renaissance, mermaids were vilified because they were seen as these temptresses that would lure men into the watery waves and, take away their innocence and then lead them to their death on the rocks. So I think a lot of these things that we see, especially whenever they're associated with women, whether they be witches or vampires or even ghosts, if they are female, there's something to be feared, there's something to be despised, and they're supposed to be resisted at all costs. And I think that is the fingerprints of men writing these kind of, morality tales, these cautionary tales. But yeah, I think that the world will be a far different place if all these great women throughout history were given the same amount of space as men had.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is a good point. I do believe that also.
Yeah, I wrote a book about witches a few years ago, and doing my research, it was really eye-opening to see how many, especially in early Jewish culture, how often women were needed for their advice and for their input. The priestly class was completely male. You could not come to God unless you went through somebody who was a man and had that kind of power, conferred to him, right? But it was different for female witches or sorceresses or whatever. You could come directly to them, and guess what? They could do exactly the same thing that the priest could do, or even more, and you didn't have to go through any intermediary. A woman is completely approachable, So witches were for scary things because it would upset that status quo that men needed so badly.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
So then you would say, no witch should suffer to live. Well, of course not, because they're doing everything that you're doing and more, and they're not charging anything at all, right? If you go to a witch in the ancient world, the priest is going to demand a sacrifice of which they keep the meat, right? This isn't all kind of, a God thing, right? So you go to a priest and you spend however much money you have and you slice a bull's throat because apparently God wants that. And then the priest then is able to take the money. You go to a witch and they're actually just going to give you the answers that you need, right? There's no kind of cultic practices that need to go on there. And there's also, looking back at the Witch of Endor as well, too, she was not outside of the belief system. She was able to contact the spirits of these heroes. So she was obviously a believer. She was just set aside because she was simply a woman.
Right. Yeah, I like that story of the Witch of Endor. I mean, this especially towards the end, when it took so much energy out of her to cast that spell or bring that person back that she literally fainted or was just exhausted. Doing that kind of work, it's amazing how much energy somebody or a spirit uses.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that is true. And that is a great way to start as an investigator or someone that's enthusiastic about the world of the paranormal. What we see in that story is a physical output, right? Something physically happens to that person. So it's not just like some sort of miracle that goes on. It has depth to it and has flesh and bones to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but some fascinating things like, and also when we have in Ezekiel with the wheel, and then the angels that are descending as well too. Throughout the entire Bible. I mean, I think that the Bible probably should be introduced in Paranormal 101 because it really has everything in there that's really part of the unexplained tradition of things that we're looking for now.
So let's get into some stories or some experiences you've had, whether it's the paranormal or, I mean, where do you want to start? You want to?
Well, I think a lot of these stories that I have from my research and things that happen to me first person aren't just like a Bigfoot story or a werewolf story. There's so many different elements to it that it shows how interconnected everything is. Okay. So I will tell you a couple stories and then you guys can figure out what we're dealing with. So in my area, I live in Western Pennsylvania. Like I said, we have the Chestnut Ridge here, which is, one of those features that, it's been called since the 1970s, the Twilight Zone of Pennsylvania, because so many strange things happen there. I mean, that's where I do most of my research. Actually, the house I live in right now, my house is on the corner of Chestnut and Ridge. So all of my life, I've been within this area. So like I said, I do a lot of my investigations there. And I was out on an investigation one time looking for a dog man. And this is whenever they were fairly new, okay? And we were in a very isolated area. There was only one way in and one way out, and that was the exact same way. So there was no way that anybody was going to put something over on us. And that's the reason why I like to investigate there. So me and another friend of mine, another investigator, we were out, this was probably about close to midnight. And all of a sudden around us, we noticed what looked like static electricity. It's if you pulled the covers off of a bed at night, that kind of thing. And there was no storms going on, nothing like that. But something within us, that flight or fight response, clicked in and said, we probably should get out of here. So as we turned to walk down the path from which we came, a light, it's hard to describe. We went back later and measured it, and it was probably approximately 8 feet off the ground. But it was a light that looked like a flare turned on, and it glistened, and then it glistened out. So it's as if somebody took but it was brilliant white. So it was like somebody took an emergency flare and that kind of sparkling type of thing, and it just stayed there. It illuminated. It stayed illuminated, and then it kind of sprinkled out. It sparkled out. And I looked at my investigator. That is, that's odd. Whatever happened, that's odd. So again, we have to go through where this light emanated from. So as we get to that point where the light came on, we hear something following us in the woods on the right-hand side of us. It's pitch black outside. Strange anomalous things are happening to our equipment. Our flashlights aren't working. Our battery on our VCR on our video camera is drained. Weird things are starting to happen. So we start going, and every now and then We can hear this whatever's over there on our right hand side moving with us, and sometimes even taking in a breath every now and then, which is, those things, those moments are the most terrifying, because you don't know what's over there, and it's not like just breaking branches. Whenever you hear that breath, that's what makes it really hit home, right? Because there's something out there that is breathing and it's following us, right? So at this point, it is so dark, and we're also so admittedly terrified that we lose the trail. So at this point, we have, jagger bushes hitting us, branches and everything like that, because we've left the trail. And if this thing is indeed is a predator, we're probably in no good situation right now. This is probably a great way for it to pounce upon us, So as we start panicking, off to the left up on a hill, check this out, guys, there was a cemetery.
Oh.
And from that cemetery, I hear my voice called. First and only time I'd ever heard my voice called audibly. Okay.
Oh, wow.
But what was so unique about that is where my name came from, where that voice came from. When we went towards it, that got us back on the trail again, right? That was what got us back on the trail.
Yeah.
And as we finally got on the trail and started to head up the hill to where our vehicles were parked, whatever was following us in the woods was obviously extremely angry, because you could hear it at this point taking in air and even emitting a very, very low frequency growl. So I don't know what happened there. I have a suggestion to say that what may have happened is, when we talk about things from an interdimensional type of perspective, was that static electricity and all that kind of, air, energy in the air, is that the proverbial portal door opening? Or is that, the energy needed for something to manifest, And is that light that we saw that looked like, the flare, was that a door opening from one dimension into another? Because we know that when we went down there was nothing following us. But after that light came on, did something come out of that light and now is part of our world, right? Part of our framework. Again, I don't know what happened. That was really the first punch that I had as an investigator, to think that there's more out there than meet the eyes, because I've been a fan. I hadn't written a book yet. I was a fan of the paranormal. I watched the shows. I was kind of like one of these hobbyists, these kind of amateur hobbyists that would go out there and see what we could find. But that shifted my whole entire worldview upside down, because I knew at that point that whatever was out there was far different than what the investigators were doing on television. There was something else out there that didn't make any sense and may not leave footprints, may not even be able to be flesh and blood. But whatever it was, we were out there dealing with it. And then from there on, I've been doing it and writing it ever since.
Well, did it look like a light, or did it look like an orb?
Well, excellent question. If I were ghost hunting, I would have called it an orb.
Okay.
That's exactly what I would have called it, right? If I were a UFO investigator, I would have probably called it some sort of, low flying, unidentified, aerial body or whatever like that. I recently got I recently put a book out. It's not published yet, about earthlights, because that's one of the things that really drive me on as well too. Because as I do more and more investigations, and as I talk to more and more people, a lot of the experiences are precipitated by the presence of an earthlight of some kind, of an orb, of a spook light. So I think that there is a connection there. I think this is that energy that is going on, and that's just part of the marvel, right? I mean, that is part of the wonder. And whenever I talk about fairies, because this is very similar to a lot of medieval fairy beliefs, we talk about the will of the wisp and the idea of these creatures able to take, pure energy, even St. Elmo's fire and this kind of stuff. I'm thinking now that we are connecting the dots, but we also should consider that all these things that we see may emanate from one particular source, and that is a very elemental source. So instead of looking for Bigfoot and Dogman and possibly even UFOs and ghosts, they might all come from the single source, and that is a source that is part of the world itself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they talk about elementals being, you know, obviously fire and water and wind. And, you know, there's stories about Sasquatch or Bigfoot using elementals and by knocking on the trees to wake them up to help them out.
Absolutely. See, another good point. So if we took a time, if we had a van that had a time machine in it, and we go back in time, and one of my favorite periods is the Middle Ages because it really shaped a lot of our thoughts. And if we went back there and we would go to a forest, because guess what? There were people that reported wood knocking in forests, and they didn't see it as Bigfoot. They saw it as it being fairy haunted, right? This was a sure sign that fairy. That's the reason why, like you said, you know, you so eloquently put it, that the reason why people knock on wood is to kind of get that fairy in the wood, right? You know, to come about. So always associated with the natural world, with the wildness. Another curious thing though is too, during the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and even now, whenever you see pictures of the wild man represented, how often do you see him holding a stick? Yeah. See, now the idea that the wood knocking, I think that it was so synonymous with this creature that they actually put it as part of the iconography of what this thing is like. So whenever you saw this creature or saw this hairy wild man carrying a stick, you knew immediately what that stick was for, and that was for wood knocking.
So what do you know about elementals? I mean, specifically, is there any different ones in different species of trees? I mean, I know there's different rock elementals compared to tree elementals. To the
sure.
earth.
Yep, every tree has, according to, I mean, you can really see this laid down by the alchemists, because it was very important for them to know about the natural world, because if you knew about the world and you knew about the attending spirits, you could communicate with these spirits and placate them and deal with them, right? So Paracelsus was one of these great alchemists that would come up with, you know, the ideas of the sylphs and the salamanders and the gnomes. He came up with, you know, earth, sky, water, you know, wind, all these kind of things, the elements. And in each of those elements, there was a attending spirit. So in the water element was the undine, right? And they often represented themselves, or, you know, were personified as mermaids. And the gnome was these little, you know, creatures that lived under the ground. And of course, you would have subsets of all these things. But I mean, there were fairies out there. Whenever you think that, you know, fairies are awesome because you go out as a little girl and have tea parties with them under the trees. Not always the case. So one particular fairy, one of my favorite fairies, is called the Red Cap, right? And he would just simply live out in the countryside, and he would wait along country roads for a traveler to pass at night, and then he would take his knife and he would cut their throats. And then he was called the Red Cap because he took his hat off and he dyed it in the blood of the person he just killed. And not only did he dye it in the blood of the person he just killed, if he did not keep his hat perpetually dyed, perpetually drenched in human blood, he would die. So I think that's a very cool story. And they're not all very small either. You know, there's the Yorkshire Giant, which stood somewhere over 10 feet tall. And again, possibly a Bigfoot origin story there as well, too. And he would live in the marshes and in the woods and to wait for travelers. Now, these are cautionary tales, too, because it wasn't a good thing for people to walk along home at night, right? This was a time whenever there were still wolves in England. But you could sometimes hear him coming, the Yorkshire Giant, by this kind of knocking sound. And what that was is whenever he would waylay somebody and kill them, he would take the head of the person as a trophy and tie them around his belt. And so there would be all these skulls around his belt through different layers of decomposition. and as he walked, they would kind of cling together like, macabre wind chimes. So that's a great story for that one as well too. And then in Ireland, of course, Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, definitely knew about these fairies, but they had their own little castle out in the middle of nowhere, and they too would wait for travelers. And whenever they found a traveler, they would attack him and they would drain him of his blood, because that's how they ate. And what is very, very interesting is in the translation from the Gaelic, the name would mean Dracula. So not like Count Dracula, but it would come out to be phonetically the same as Dracula. So I think that's a little wink to Bram Stoker's Irish heritage there as well. But no, so with fairies, I will tell you that this other story. It might take a couple minutes, but I think it's very, very worth your while. So most of my adult life, I've been a teacher by profession, okay? And I was teaching in this one place, and a lot of the times they would say, you can't tell anybody what you do, right? Because that would stop people from wanting their kids to go to school. And I remember I had done something that got me in the newspaper, and one of the dads because I was teaching little kids, one of the dads comes out of the car to pick up his daughter, and he spits this wad of tobacco out, and he wipes it off his mouth with the back of his hand. And says, "Are you that ghost hunter guy?" Now, I don't know exactly what to say at this point, right? But I was honest, and I said yes. And he looked me square in the eye and said, "Will you take me out sometime?" So after that, I was cool, right? Because the teachers didn't have to fear about any kind of, bad publicity or anything like that. So they thought it would be a good thing around Halloween if I could take them on a ghost tour. I said, "Sure, I could take you on a ghost tour." So we got together, maybe about 12 people or something like that. A couple of the teachers brought their husbands. So there was a smattering of men and women there. And I thought we would take them to a local graveyard where there was, some cool things and always some stories. And this was the same area where I had the Dogman incident, or the lights incident. So I thought, I'll tell that story, and I will really kind of tell them, a lot of times whenever you go out ghost hunting, nothing happens. But guess what, guys? Something did happen. So there was one girl that was part of the group that, for whatever reason, things started to be focused upon her. Yeah, lights looked like they were dripping out of the ground, very, very slow, and a light would come up out of the ground, and then it would hover on her face. You couldn't see this with the naked eye. This was only on camera. And as you would take the pictures on the digital camera, it always stayed there, right? Things would be moving all around and everything like that. But that one light would stay there. And then it would gradually move, and it would go around as if it was looking at people, whatever, assessing the situation. Then the girl started to complain of a headache. So I knew at that point, as an investigator, that it's probably good to get out of there, because what's going on now is there's interactions that other people weren't really ready for. So we decided to get out of there. So as we go heading back to our car, we start seeing these almost LED pinpoints of blues and whites and yellows and red lights that just simply manifest on the side of the trail and start jumping back and forth across the trail. Never seen anything before like this in my entire life. And then again, like I always say, that all things are connected. And then we hear something that sounds like chanting, just carried on the wind, So we all run back to our cars. One girl happened to be scratched, as a matter of fact, which was really the first time I ever had anything like that happen. But everybody was terrified. Okay, everybody was terrified. Now, I need to tell you a little bit more about this story too. So one of the reasons why I like to research this area is because as the folklore goes, there was supposed to be a witch down there. Okay, so we go back to 1781. Settlers new to this area, right? The Revolutionary War was just fought. So this was a no man's land, right? This was a wild wilderness with bear and mountain lion and everything. And as the story goes, that this was a very Christian settlement, but outside of the settlement, we lived a hedge witch, right? and people didn't pay much attention to her unless you needed a baby born, right? You needed a midwife. Somebody got sick because the nearest doctor would have been probably 3 or 4 days away. So the witch acted as a doctor, as a midwife, as animal husbandry, as somebody that would tell you a good time to plant the crops. So as the legend has it, it was the first part of May. The crops, nothing was growing, nothing was even starting to be planted yet because the conditions were so bad. Animals started to die, and lo and behold, children were being birthed and they were stillborn. So obviously there was something up, and the townspeople came together and said, it might be that witch, right? Because now we have to start blaming somebody. So the townspeople got together and they thought, what is the best way to rid yourself of a witch? Now, what's interesting, this was 1781. The last witch that was burned in Scotland was 1735. So it's possible somebody, because this is a very a Scots-Irish area, so it's very possible that somebody who lived in that particular community saw it happen in Scotland, or at least knew something about this, right? So they knew that the way to get rid of a witch is by burning her at the stake. And as the legend goes, they indeed burned her at the stake. And as the flames were lapping about her, she put a curse on the town. And she said, 100 years from this day, I'm going to send enough water to quench these flames. And what happens on May 1st, in 1881, the Johnstown flood comes through and destroys the town, right? So very, very interesting. So as I had everybody back down there as well, too, we were also looking for the idea of a witch. And witches are often associated with familiars and all that stuff. So, we have the chanting, very feminine sounded chanting. We have these lights dancing back and forth. We have one of our party who was a woman that actually got scratched. And guess what? It was called out as well, too, because this didn't happen right on Halloween. It happened in November. I had a scarf on. I was missing the scarf. Something took the scarf off of me. So we decided we were going to go to a local restaurant and talk about the ordeal and see if we could piece everything together. Nobody could make sense of what had happened, and also everybody had their very own unique take on it, from ghosts to demons, whatever the case may be. So everybody saw what had happened to us very differently and very subjectively. So we decided to call it a night, and I go back home and I open up my door to my house, and I jump back because I see a light on in my house, and it's just not any light, flickering going on. So I go into my kitchen, and the stove is on, and it's a gas stove, right? So all 4 burners of my stove is on. Remember, we were looking for a witch that was supposedly burned at the stake. So and I'm freaked out. So I turned off the real quick. I went outside, took a couple deep breaths because I'm scared at this point, right? So then I decide that, I'll go back in. I calm myself down. And as I hung up my coat on my coat rack, my scarf was there.
Oh, wow.
The scarf that I lost during the investigation. So a couple of things about this, my friends. One thing is that whatever these things are, they know who you are, or they have access to that knowledge, right? Terrifying, and that still gives me chills to this very day. And I have the scarf actually in a tote. I will never wear it, but I will never get rid of it either, But I still have that to this day. But all those people that we were with that night in that investigation, we were all very, very close friends. Nobody talks to each other nowadays. Yep. It was like such a traumatic type of event. Nobody talks to anybody anymore. But yeah, that was a scary thing. But then I have another story also involving my house. So I have 5 kids. And I woke up one morning to one of the worst news that a parent can have, and that is it was a snow day. School was closed, so I would be home with these children. So I smoked cigarettes back at the time, so I thought, to get my day started, I need to go out and have a 5-minute cigarette. So I go outside, and I notice that across my front lawn, there are impressions. This is one of those kind of, 'twas the night before Christmas snows, where everything was still glistening in that early morning light, and nobody had been outside yet because it was frigidly cold as well. Not only was there snow, but it was very cold, so nobody was going outside that day. But there was something curious about my yard that it didn't make any sense. So I got a little bit closer, and I find these tracks. Now, they're not huge tracks. They're about the size of a dollar bill, so not very large. But you could see the toes, and you could see that it walked through my yard. I thought, this is so strange, Not only did it walk through my yard, but it actually looked into my dining room. So the tracks went up to my dining room, looked in the dining room, went over the hill, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm surrounded by woods. I'm a Bigfoot investigator, gosh darn it. So let's see where this goes. So I start going towards the woods, and the tracks just appeared out of nowhere. They didn't come from the woods. They began in the middle of my frickin' yard.
Wow.
And this is what's so curious about this too. So it was a right track, and then another right track. So just two tracks, two right tracks, and then a left track and a right track. And then it built up a cadence, right, where it became, I don't know, corporeal. I don't know what happened, but it looked as if something either stepped off of something or took a while to completely materialize into a full-bodied, manifestation. So whatever this was took a while to appear. It walks through my yard and goes to my dining room window, looks in, and then it goes over the hill, and also the tracks just disappear.
Oh.
So it's a trackway, and these are documented as well too. So I was glad that I was able to get this all documented. So so the trackway was probably maybe less than 100 yards total. Nothing big. But some of the things that was uneasiness about this is, so I'm a Bigfoot investigator, and it comes to my house, So does it know about me? I mean, do they investigate us as well? Or I'm also coming to the conclusion that a lot of times when we experience things, there may be almost an unwritten agreement between you and what you're experiencing, as if there is a need for a switch to be flipped. It needs to accept you, and you need to accept it. And once that's done, there's a circuit that is formed, okay? But you can't have one without the other. I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys or not.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me, that it almost needed to be facilitated by me, and it was there for me, as if it was almost, a gift is too strong of a word, but almost as if it was like, we know you're there and you know that we're here, right? Again, no, I never saw a Bigfoot in my life, but what it was these tracks that appeared. Now, a couple months later, we'll fast forward a couple months later, and now it's spring, right? I'm up there with the kids, and guess what, guys? In the woods, I find the tracks again. Now, they're not around my house. They're not around my house at all. They are in the woods where, good little Bigfoot should live. And they were in the mud, again, size of a dollar. Took pictures of that as well, too. And I sent them to Stan Gordon, who is the godfather of everything paranormal in Western Pennsylvania. And I sent him the pictures. I sent him the pictures in the wintertime, and the pictures are there. And then he posted them on his website. So you go to stangordon.net and see them right there if you want to. But what's interesting is where we used to go walking, where we found these prints, it was a nice place. I mean, people would walk their dogs up there. People go hunting up there as well, too. I was actually lucky enough to harvest a couple of deer up there in that area over the course of my my hunting experience. But it was a cool place where kids would go up and play. People would go up there and shoot squirrel and things like that. It was just a really nice area that was part of the public land system, okay? Now, this is where it gets very, very curious. 2 days after those pictures appeared on Stan Gordon's website, all it said on there was Derry Township. Didn't say the town where it happened or anything like that. Those woods were now closed off and made private property, and nobody's allowed up there now.
Wow.
I know. That's very, very curious. I was at a conference, and this one guy came up to my table, and he was telling me about his events. and he had some things happen to him that was only about maybe a mile or two from my house, and it was on state game lands. Right, these were the open public lands for hunting. And he said, I was going there, I was investigating this area, I found some really cool things. He was looking at stick structures and such, and then he said he went back, and all of a sudden he heard somebody. He said, "Hey!" He turned around. There was a guy there with a fluorescent orange vest on, and the guy said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, this is public lands." He said, "Not anymore. The Game Commission just sold it to us. So now these lands that were set aside are now being no trespassing because people are seeing strange things there." What is awesome about this story too, about where the witch took place, about the werewolf took place, all this kind of stuff where I do my investigations, that used to be a thriving town, right? So whenever the Johnstown flood came through, they decided they were going to make it into flood control lands. And now to this day, they flood out that area. So you can't, So I think people do know what's going on. I think they've known about it for a long time, and they try to make these things as inaccessible as humanly possible. But and I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but that is really one of those things I couldn't quite describe or really kind of comprehend how these two instances were so similar. And the state game lands never sell off to private people. Land in and of itself is a very hard commodity, especially ones that are part of conservancy, and people never sell off conservancy land.
That kind of reminds me of the national parks or state parks.
Yes.
Where all of a sudden they section off areas of the park and they won't let you go to.
Yep.
And they say, it's to repair the paths or whatever, but the paths look perfectly good to us when we go by them.
Exactly. See, these are all the things that we're so curious about this. But if my presumptions are true, and it was because it was reported on Stan Gordon's site, that means that somebody was monitoring the site, number one, and they may have gotten the whereabouts simply by looking my name up and finding out where I lived as well, too. That's easy enough to do, right? I mean, if you have a computer and you know a guy's first and last name, you can pretty much find out where they live. And I think it took very little to put two and two together and figure out this is what was going on. But within 48 hours, my friends, within 48 hours, the place where I did so much of my investigation was now closed up. And I'm not talking about just no trespassing signs. I'm talking about where there was access in there with bikes and things like that, trail bikes. We're talking about trees were put over there. So they did a complete and utter shutdown of that site.
Yeah.
Wow.
You said something earlier that kind of caught my interest. You said it's like they needed acknowledgement from you. So that reminds me of what is that resemblance to black-eyed children and demons that need you to acknowledge and invite them?
Yeah. I think that these are things that are, again, keep on going back to the title of your show. I think these are things that are seeping through the veil. I really do. I think that these are things that are part of a world that is our world, but somehow different as well. It's almost like there's different realities piled up one on top of the other. And every now and then we slip into their world or they slip into our world. But I think that there are certain beings within that world that can make the transition at will into our world. I truly feel that way. Whether they need you to do that, whether they need you as the conduit to do it, almost like in shamanism, maybe, possibly, something like that. But I think there's an energy that's needed. I think there's an energy that's produced. And as a researcher, that's one of the things that I like to look at, the idea of bringing science into it. If these things are using energy to manifest in our world, then that energy should be able to be recorded in some way. So as I go on in my research, I think I'm going to look more in those lines. Like I said, I just wrote the book on Earthlights, and it might actually be available on Amazon right now. I'm not sure, but I just wrote it, and as I look at these Earthlights from all over the world, and I'm talking about all over the world have these things as well too. We talked about fairies, we talked about Bigfoot and everything. All over the world has these traditions of these unknown spook lights, what have you. If they are to be part of the world itself, power points in the world, it should be able to. Oh, there I am. Okay, I went off there for a second, but
Yeah, just a
the
little
powers
bit.
Just
that
a
be
little.
probably heard what we were talking about. That's right. That's right. But yeah, I think that there should be a way to calculate and to record and measure exactly what kind of energies these are.
Right.
So what was the name of your book that you said you're doing or just got done doing, you said, or?
Yeah, it is finished. It is finished. It's going to be published through Dave Spinks, as a matter of fact. So it's called An Inquiry into Earthlights.
Okay.
All right. Very nice. And that'll be on Amazon or
Yes.
through your website or?
Yeah, on me. Yeah, and on Dave Spinks' website as well too. So yeah, it will be on my website. You can find it on Amazon. Sure.
Okay.
Nice.
Well, I know we only have a few minutes left because you got to go, and you
I
got
do.
a commitment.
Unfortunately, I would love to spend much more time with you, as I was telling you before the show started, and I do have to tell the listeners as well too, who I've been reading the comments. And a really intelligent group of people here. My family, unfortunately, are part of the reason why I cannot go the full or any time over an hour today is because my daughter, who's in high school, has a project that she has to work on, so I have to take her to an event today because she writes at the school newspaper. So that's the reason why I'm unable to keep on talking to you wonderful people. But if I don't sound too proud, I would love to come back on your show someday. I would love to continue this conversation.
Yeah, we'll reschedule you for another date, and hopefully we can get an hour and a half, 2 hours. And
I would appreciate that. Yeah, and I still have some pretty good stories I still have under my sleeve here, so I didn't give everything away right now.
Right.
There you go.
Well, that's one reason why we're early also, if everyone's kind of going, oh, why are you guys live? But before we go, I would love your thoughts on what you think of inner Earth or hollow Earth. Do you feel like these elementals actually come from inner Earth?
Well, I will tell you as a researcher, we do see a glimpse of something like that in the Green Children of Woolpit. Have you ever heard this story?
No.
Okay, so this is in the Middle Ages, and there's a place in England called Woolpit, right? And that's a derivation of the word for wolf pit, because there was a wolf pit in town to trap any kind of marauding wolves. So what happens is one day a farmer is out there and he sees these two children who are green in color.
Oh,
and
wow.
they speak a language that they cannot understand. So they take them back into town. They try to domesticate them, they only eat vegetables. And sooner, within a few months, that green color starts fading from their skin. And soon enough, they start learning. Yeah, they start learning rudimentary amounts of English so they can start telling the story. Okay. So the one girl says that they came from a land inside the earth. Now, this is where, and they called it St. Martin's Land because, according to the girl, you could hear the bells of St. Martin's Church from the interior of where they were. And they grazed these very small breeds of cow. Like it was like a copy of what happened here above here, except it was underground, right? And she said that there was her kingdom, or the kingdom from where she came from, was inside the earth itself, and her and her brother got lost, and that's how they found their way out into this world. Okay. Now the brother was baptized, and he soon died after his baptism. And the woman was they said that she became very wanton, was the word they used. So she became very, very popular with the guys. And then her story was lost in time. So we don't really know what happens. But we do have these little anecdotal stories coming from, 1,000 years ago that tell us that there was not only a belief in, but a simple acceptance that there was a world inside our world. I still keep an open mind. I am definitely somebody that believes in the Gaia theory, that our world is a living organism.
Mhm.
And as a living organism, it can interact with us in ways that we simply have not really comprehended. But simply because it's a living organism doesn't mean that it does not have an interior and all that other kind of stuff where things can come in and out of. But that's a subject we could go on for hours next time if you
Wow.
like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah, so the Green Children of Woolpit. Check that out, folks, and that will
Wow.
be your required reading for next time.
All right. This sounds like a good stopping point and got
Yes.
people intrigued on what's going to be next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'll tell you what. I hope the same group comes in whenever I come in again because I had a fun time, and it went so fast. It was an hour just flew by.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's just so interesting. You get on these subjects and pretty soon you look up, it's like, oh my gosh, where'd the time go?
Right.
It did.
And now you get to chaperone a teenager.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that is the case. My friends, thank you so much for having me. I will be looking forward to your email, and we'll do this craziness all over again.
All
All
right.
right, sounds
We'll
good.
get you
Thank you.
scheduled and we'll get a hold of you. Thanks for
Thank you,
being
and
here.
thank you, listeners, as well too, for being so utterly patient with me.
And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And we will see everyone this next Wednesday.
Yep, we're scheduled for Wednesday late night or early Thursday. It would be 12:30 a.m. Thursday, actually. So
Yep.
we look forward to seeing everybody in chat and telling stories and seeing what chat has to talk about.
So, like I said, sorry we kind of popped on early, but we kind of had to rearrange our schedule a little bit for him, and it worked out great.
We wanted to be respectful for our
Yep.
guests. I mean, we want to make sure it's convenient for them, that they're just not always, doing it for us. I mean, we wanted to make sure they had enough time to tell some stories.
Yep.
We knew it was going to be a short time, but we still wanted to have them on here because we scheduled them and had the thumbnail and everything floating around. So we just didn't want to cancel. And
No.
well, there's Marty.
Hi, Marty. I hope you guys are having fun camping. And yeah, we're just ending the show now. We kind of started early. He had his daughter come up and go, Dad, don't you realize we have something going on tonight? And he went, what? So, hey, we understand,
So please hit the like button, like Susie B says,
Yep.
and subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. So when we have the other guests or when we have Ron back, you won't
Yes.
miss the story of the green whooping children.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have Ron back as soon as we can.
So in saying that, we'll see you guys next time. We love you all. Thank you for sharing your time with us and coming in to chat. And we just love you guys all so much. And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Love you.
Love you guys. Bye.